The Mount Washington Auto Road welcomes you to the heart of the White Mountains, where you're about to embark on an adventure to the highest peak in the Northeast. This is the birthplace of legends, and you'll be following a path that leads through time and winds its way through woods and weather extremes. At the summit lies the Mount Washington State Park, where you'll see the home of the Mount Washington Observatory and the historic Summit Stage Office, the building where a world record wind speed was recorded in 1934. More about that later. This audio tour will be your information and entertainment guide as you travel on the oldest man-made attraction in the United States. Your driving time to the top will be approximately 25 minutes, and this tour will be your guide to the remarkable views and amazing things that have happened here since the road opened to the public in 1861. Now, before we get to all the storytelling on how this legendary road came to be, and some of the extraordinary things folks have done on it, we have some pretty important information to pass along. Among the many wonders of Mount Washington, you'll be entering the Fragile Alpine Zone, home to numerous rare and unique forms of plants and flowers. There will be many opportunities to stop your car and walk around, so please take care to leave these special environments as you found them. It's only because others have been thoughtful in past generations that these small endangered treasures are still here for us to enjoy. If you watch your step, literally, future generations will have the same opportunity. Please only walk on the gravel trails and not on any vegetation. It's only through our continued stewardship that we can protect and preserve these treasured resources. Just imagine that this road opened to the public in 1861, and the scenes which are about to unfold before you have remained unchanged since then. Also unchanged is the need for safe driving. The road's remarkable safety record over the past century and a half is because drivers, whether in horse-drawn vehicles of the old days or the motor vehicles of this century, respect the basic rules of safety, which apply both to the trip up and down Mount Washington. As you ascend the mountain and then descend after your visit to the summit, these driving tips will help maximize safety and minimize inconvenience. Please keep the following in mind as your journey continues. The Mount Washington Auto Road has two-way traffic coming and going at all times, and cars coming down should yield the right-of-way to cars going up. Keep to your side of the road. And don't worry, it's wide enough for two cars to pass anywhere along the road. We urge you to drive up in the normal gear you would use on the highway, usually drive, or D, which will allow your transmission to normally shift as it needs to according to the grade of the road. Shift to a lower gear if your engine seems to be sluggish. Also refer to the driving suggestions you were given at the toll house. On the way back down the mountain, be sure to use the lowest gear available in order for your transmission to help brake the car and help avoid overheating your brakes. If ever there was a road that was designed for low gear, this is it. Also, avoid using your air conditioner, as this may cause the engine to overwork. There will be plenty of cool mountain air to refresh you as you continue to gain elevation. If your vehicle does begin to run hot, turn on the heater. It may sound strange, but this will actually help cool the engine. Should you find yourself driving in the fog at any time while on the mountain, turn on your headlights for the sake of all oncoming traffic. And please remember, it's a New Hampshire state law that all persons under 18 years of age must wear a seatbelt. Mark Twain once said, "If you don't like the weather in New England, just wait a minute." Well, he must have been thinking of Mount Washington when he made this famous statement, because things can change quickly and dramatically around here. Depending on the road and weather conditions, you should maintain a speed of approximately 15 to 20 miles per hour. However, your actual speed will depend on the current traffic flow and the prevailing weather. If it seems like you're holding up cars behind you, please be considerate of others and stop at one of the many pull-off areas to allow them to pass. If for any reason you need assistance while on the road, flag down one of our white and green road crew pickup trucks or guided tour vans. Our drivers will be happy to help you in any way. Now, let's get to some storytelling about this amazing place. The creation of our Road to the Sky all began back in 1853, when the New Hampshire legislature granted a charter to General David O. Macomber to build an 8-mile road to the summit. It was a challenging task he set for himself, to say the least, but he had a vision of how tourism would affect the area in the years to come. The White Mountains were beginning to gain a reputation as a vacation destination, with grand hotels being built to cater to wealthy travelers during the summer season. His path to the summit of Mount Washington would surely be the high point of any visit to the North Country. In fact, your presence here today confirms just how right he was. One of the first grand hotels was the iconic Glen House, which was located at the base area from which you began your climb. This hotel, along with 3 others which shared its name, all burned to the ground between 1884 and 1967. For many decades to follow, there was no lodging on the property. But after many years of planning, the latest Glen House opened for business in 2018. Like its predecessors, the new hotel caters to travelers looking for the ultimate White Mountain experience. Unlike the previous structures, however, the new Glen House represents the pinnacle of green building practices and eco-friendly accommodations. Feel free to stop in for a tour or a great meal when you get back to the base area. As you drive upward through the hardwood forest, try to imagine what the early road builders faced. Dense trees and underbrush, steep ridges, and immense boulders and ledges oppose the construction at every turn. This isn't a particularly inviting place to excavate a roadway, but no adversity would be too great if it resulted in the conquest of this famed peak. One young woman who visited the Glen House in 1854, Mary Langdon, explored the work in progress and wrote an article for Harper's Weekly magazine. In it, she recounted her memories of the road during its construction.
We have all been walking in the lowering twilight on the road, which is making its way up Mount Washington. Though nothing is impossible to modern science, it would seem impossible to vanquish the obstacles to the enterprise, the inevitable steepness of the ascent, the rocky precipices. We passed on through debris of blasted rocks, stumps of uprooted trees, and heaps of stones until we got far enough into the mountain to feel its stern solitude.
And when that was written in 1854, they were still 7 years from completion. Unfortunately for General Macomber, his financial backing ran out about halfway up the mountain. So, it ended up taking 2 companies years of backbreaking hand labor, blasting, logging, clearing, and grading to complete the task. During a 2-year delay after the first company failed, it was questionable as to whether or not the project would ever be completed. But the lure of Mount Washington was too great to keep this road from reaching the top. It was particularly difficult to make any progress when natural obstacles such as the weather combined with the primitive technology of the era to slow things down. Since dynamite had not yet been invented, all the blasting was done with black powder, a dangerous and at times unstable explosive. In order to split the massive rock ledges which blocked the way, individual holes were hand-drilled into solid rock and then filled with black powder, blown up or split apart one at a time. All the logging was done with axes, saws, and elbow grease. Teams of oxen and workhorses drew carts filled with gravel. All in all, it was a dirty, dangerous job, largely accomplished by immigrant labor working in a place not yet fit for man or beast. But finally, on August 8, 1861, the construction was done, and done right. Many decades later, in a study completed with aerial surveys and the latest technology, the Army Corps of Engineers could find no improvement to the route as laid out in the middle of the last century. Today, this toll road is still privately owned and operated by the Mount Washington Summit Road Company, and with very little change in ownership, has remained a family business since 1906. As you continue your ascent, glimpses of pristine mountain vistas begin to reveal themselves, but it wasn't always that way. In fact, around the turn of the century, logging barons had virtually clear-cut much of what is now the White Mountain National Forest. The decimation of these native forests created not only fire and erosion dangers, but created such an unsightly mess that the cause of conservation was taken up by politicians, downstream mill owners, and average citizens alike. As a result, the Weeks Act of 1911 established the White Mountain National Forest, among many others. These mountains remain protected today and stand as a reminder of the natural beauty of the wilderness. It's ironic, though, that it took the near destruction of everything that you see around you to motivate the effort to save it. Thankfully, what you see today is remarkably similar to what the first adventure seekers found in 1861. It was called the Mount Washington Carriage Road in those days, and there were as many as 25 mountain wagons and 120 horses in service each day of the season. These mountain wagons were specially designed and constructed for the carriage road by the Abbott Downing Company in Concord, New Hampshire. This company manufactured the famous Concord stagecoaches, which, aside from being shipped worldwide for use in commerce and transportation, were used in practically every Western movie ever made. The carriage road mountain wagons were pulled by 6 horses and seated as many as 12 passengers. A typical trip took about 4 hours up And though no one was in a rush in those days, passengers were at times asked to assist with one task. On windy days, those making the journey were asked to get out and collect rocks to add weight to the wagon so it wouldn't tip over in the strong winds above treeline. Though it is unmarked today, the halfway point along the road used to be a stopover for guests and horses in the old days. Here, the halfway house offered shelter and refreshments before the last long pull to the top. The ride down took 2 hours and was another adventure in itself. The steep grade and heavy loads meant that the stages wore through a set of leather brakes on every trip, as the horses, driver, and wagon fought gravity the whole way down. Also, the carriage road stages weren't alone on the road by any means. Individual hotels had their own coaches for their guests, while other folks drove the family buckboard or surrey, or rode on horseback. Then, as now, it was an active road that required the driver's full attention. As the word continued to spread, more and more people found their way to New Hampshire's North Country. New railroads continued to push their way past the lakes and into the hills, and while still a rural setting, the world had finally beaten a path to Mount Washington's doorstep. As you gain elevation, you'll begin to notice startling changes in the vegetation. Nearer to the bottom of the autoroad is a typical northeastern hardwood forest, composed of maple, oak, birch, and beech trees. Further on, you'll see fewer hardwoods and more evergreens, such as balsam fir and spruce. More significantly, these trees are diminishing greatly in size, as the combination of wind, cold, and scarcity of proper soil create a difficult growing environment. Continuing upward, you are entering the Krumholtz, or the crooked wood zone. In some cases, these stunted and beautifully twisted and gnarled trees, with a height of only 2 or 3 feet, are more than 100 years old. These unique trees have adapted to survive in this often inhospitable location, as have a wide variety of wildlife that calls this mountain range home. Moose, black bear, and deer are among the larger species to be found near the bottom, while bobcat, beaver, porcupines, raccoons, foxes, coyotes, and countless types of birds can be found on Mount Washington's slopes. Even on the summit, mice, moles, shrews, and voles have adapted to life in this extreme environment. As your journey takes you further up the mountainside, you'll notice it has begun to get a bit cooler, and that the trees continue to get smaller. As the road goes on to its height of more than a mile in the sky, 6,288 feet to be exact, the climate changes with it, eventually reaching the equivalent temperature one might find 600 miles north of here in the Arctic tundra region. Just think about it. In the distance of just the first few miles upward, you've now traveled from the more familiar hardwood forest of our region through the Krumholtz to an area more like that in northern Labrador or Alaska. Here in the alpine zone of the Presidential Range, you'll find a stunning array of rare plant species, including alpine flowers, lichens, and mosses. In fact, plants like the dwarf cinquefoil live only in the White Mountains and nowhere else on the planet, and are listed as federally protected species. Many of these unusual plants, though small, are very old, with some varieties not flowering until they are 20 or more years old. Many experts believe that the mountain landscape you're viewing is more than 10,000 years in the making. So again, we ask that when leaving your vehicle to explore the mountainside, to please be aware that the endless vistas are only one of the most obvious wonders here. There is also an amazing world right at your feet, which if not cared for could be lost forever. Never pick or step on any flowers, and when out of your vehicle above treeline, please step only on defined pathways. With your help, our fragile ecosystem will be something to marvel at for centuries to come. Scientific interest in Mount Washington has been ongoing for more than 200 years. In the last century, just the novelty of being here was enough to inspire whole books. One famous writer of the mid-1800s, Reverend Thomas Starr King, had this to say about the mountain's various climates.
I send you a greeting this morning from the cupola of New Hampshire. If perchance you are suffering from the heat when this missive reaches you, let your eyes cool themselves by reading that just outside the tip-top house, the mercury is at 34 degrees. The ride from the glen was very easy. We rose indeed by climate as well as ridges. It was July at the base, late September on the ledge, and November at the apex.
The tip-top house he refers to was built in 1853. You'll see it in just a bit. It's the only original summit building that survived the Great Fire of 1908. The summit today has evolved greatly from how it all began so long ago, but it's always been a hub of activity for travelers to the White Mountains. The summit community in the 1890s was a very busy place. It featured a large hotel, stage office, railroad station, and even its own newspaper called Among the Clouds, the first and only newspaper ever to be published on a mountaintop. All visitors to the peak had their names published in its pages, along with local news and gossip. The daily editions used to make their way down the mountain along the cog railway track on a contraption known as a slideboard, or more popularly called the Devil's Shingle. Real history was made again in 1899 when a little-known inventor named Freeland O. Stanley drove his locomobile up the road. He did it for publicity, hoping to build a name for his fledgling company that he had just sold. Stanley began his expedition from Newton, Massachusetts, with the goal of finishing on the top of Mount Washington. The automotive age was dawning, and on August 31st, 1899, an unlikely little vehicle looking like a horse-drawn buggy without the horse became the first motor car to climb the mountain. As noted in Flora Stanley's account of the adventure, their journey received more laughter than laurels, as motor vehicles were still a virtually unknown sight to the general public. The amazed responses of the villagers along the way, combined with the success of the Mount Washington ascent, proved the value of this well-conceived publicity stunt. But few realized that Stanley's vehicle was the first of many that would follow, and that a new age of transportation had begun. Even F.E. Stanley himself, F.O. Stanley's twin brother and partner, wasn't sure of what the new invention would be capable of. As expressed in an 1897 letter to his wife, after one of their horseless carriages nearly caused an accident in town, he stated,
"I wrote you some time ago about motor carriages. Well, I'm building one. I'm making all the plans, and it will be 4 inches wider and 5 inches longer than our best buggy was. It will cost me about $500. It will not be afraid of a steamroller and will have no bad habits. It will stand without hitching, and perhaps that is all it will do."
Well, as history has shown us, it did much more than simply stand still, as did the Stanley brothers, who went on to create the still famous Stanley Steamer, among many other inventions. You will soon be approaching the summit. If it's a clear day, you're enjoying some of the most magnificent views to be found anywhere in the United States. If it's not a clear day, then you are truly learning what it means to be among the clouds. In either case, the summit community welcomes you. While you're here, visit the historic Tip Top House, which holds the record as the oldest summit building, standing since 1853. The Sherman Adams State Park building will offer you a top-of-the-world perspective from the observation deck, with hot meals and restrooms inside. Downstairs, explore the observatory's interactive Extreme Mount Washington Museum for a look at what life is like at the summit in winter, as well as some rare mementos of the past. And be sure to visit the historic Summit Stage Office and Gift Shop, which is where the observers huddled together while measuring a world record wind speed in 1934, an unbelievable 231 miles per hour. You won't have any trouble recognizing which building it is. It's the one that's chained to the ground. If your headlights are on, be sure to turn them off before exploring the summit. You should be coming to the parking area pretty soon, so save the rest of this tour for when you begin the trip back down. Enjoy your adventure at the top of New England. Now that you've had the opportunity to experience the world above treeline firsthand, prepare yourself for a whole new series of scenic vistas on the way down. To your left, you'll see the Great Gulf Wilderness, a glacial cirque of more than 5,500 acres that was officially designated a wilderness area in 1964. This wilderness classification is especially important as it protects this vast area from any form of man's intrusions. No timber harvesting, mining, or buildings of any kind are allowed. And with the exception of a few hiking trails, only the forces of nature are at work in the Great Gulf Wilderness. But before we continue our story, let us briefly emphasize these important driving tips. For the trip down, the 2 most important facts to remember are these. First, use low gear the whole way down. This will allow the transmission and engine to act as a brake and help maintain a slow speed. Remember, low gear is usually indicated by a 1 or an L, or L1 on your shifter, or a B if you're driving a hybrid or electric car. Second, don't ride your brakes. A pumping action of the foot pedal allows the brakes to run cooler than does a steady pressure, and never use water to cool your brakes. If they begin to fade, stop at the next pullout and allow them to cool while you enjoy the view. If you're in the fog, please turn on your headlights, and remember that cars heading down should yield the right of way to cars on their way up. While you were on the summit, you might have seen some hikers. Most are day hikers, either out to conquer the highest peak, or traversing the Presidential Range via the miles of trails that crisscross these slopes. Many hikers begin from the Appalachian Mountain Club's headquarters, just south of our base area in Pinkham Notch. From there, visitors get an amazing view into Tuckerman Ravine, world famous for its challenging spring skiing. Its legendary headwall and gullies are arguably the birthplace of extreme backcountry skiing, dating back to the 1930s. Some of the hikers you encountered may be traversing the Appalachian Trail. This famous footpath stretches more than 2,100 miles from Georgia to Maine and crosses the Otto Road on its way. Even for these folks, reaching the summit of Mount Washington is a major milestone on their journey. The native Indian populations of the area, the Abenaki tribe among others, considered Agiokochuk, as they referred to Mount Washington, a sacred place where the Great Spirit lived. So, legend has it that they never climbed the mountain. Prior to the arrival of European ships and settlers, this region was home to a great number of Native Americans. But times had begun to change as sparsely populated coastal communities of colonists continued to move inland. One of those early settlers was named Darby Field. In 1642, after seeing the shining summit from a ship off the coast of Maine, he set out in search of his fortune, enlisting 2 Native American guides to accompany him into the wilds of this unknown land. Darby set out by birch bark canoe near Exeter, New Hampshire, paddled up the coast into the Saco River and up to what is now Glen, New Hampshire. After obtaining permission from the local tribal elders, Darby Field and his 2 companions set out on what became the first ever ascent of this formidable mountain, at least the first ever by a European. Whether he sought riches, glory, adventure, or a combination of all 3, Darby and his guides achieved their quest and their place in history more than 350 years ago. However, after that epic adventure, the mountain rolled over and went back to sleep for another 150 years. It wasn't until the 1790s that the Crawford family, Abel and then Ethan after him, finally began housing guests and guiding them around Mount Washington. The family built Crawford's Inn on the southern end of the Presidential Range, in the area now known as Crawford Notch. In 1818, the inn hosted a group of visitors who arrived with the express purpose of climbing Mount Washington, and did so with the help of Ethan Crawford. Ethan's subsequent journal entry reflects the typical Yankee flair for understatement of their massive effort when he simply wrote, "My father and I made a footpath from the notch out through the woods, and it was advertised in the newspapers, and we soon began to have a few visitors." And nearly 2 centuries later, they've never stopped coming. If for nothing else, the Crawford family legacy is assured by the fact that they cut the first hiking trail up the mountain in 1819, which is still in use today and is the oldest hiking trail in America. Beyond that, the Crawfords cut the mountain's first bridle path, which incidentally later became the principal route of the Cog Railway. The history of transportation has etched itself onto the slopes of this legendary mountain. Take a moment to think again of the horse teams straining against their harnesses as the drivers spoke commands and encouragement. Horses ruled this road for the first 50 years, with the carriages and stagecoaches of that era being continuously developed and improved to cope with the harsh conditions of mountain travel. While the first motor vehicle ascended the road in 1899, it wasn't until 1912 that the first gas-powered vehicles took over the job of carrying guests up the road. From that point on, the horse-drawn era began to fade from memory, and the carriage road eventually became the auto road. At the time, however, many traditional thinkers were not ready to acknowledge the worth of these mechanical contraptions. During this era of change, a statewide newspaper, the Manchester Union Leader, wrote, "The whole thing is an unmitigated nuisance. The lives and property of perfectly helpless people have been menaced for no reason other than to provide amusement for total strangers. Some drivers can be trusted. Most cannot. If these people think of coming up another year, let them stay in jail a couple of days and everyone will be the better for it." The first motor vehicle that was used to carry passengers, a used Thomas Flyer, began the change in 1912, followed in 1920 by a fleet of Pierce Arrows, one of which is preserved in the Douglas A. Philbrook Red Barn Museum next to our base lodge. These 7-passenger touring cars were extremely durable and capable vehicles, and were used until the public started wanting a more enclosed car to protect them from the weather, whereby the Autoroad transitioned to using Ford Woody station wagons in the late 1930s. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, international travelalls were the vehicle of choice, before transitioning to the modern 12-passenger vans that we use today. In many ways, the evolution of transportation played itself out right on the path that you now travel. With an average grade of 12%, the Autoroad presented a manageable challenge for each new generation of transportation technology. Mount Washington was a test track of sorts, because if a car could prove itself on these unforgiving slopes, it could work anywhere. In 1904, one of the first motorsport events in America took place here, when the Climb to the Clouds race was contested on this road for the first time. This was 7 years before the first 500-mile race at the Brickyard in Indianapolis, and 12 years prior to the inaugural Pikes Peak Hill Climb in Colorado. Climb to the Clouds has been run sporadically throughout the years, with course records being reset 23 times along the way. Many famous race car drivers and automobile manufacturers have competed in the event during its colorful history. Among them, the legendary Carroll Shelby in 1956, driving a Ferrari 375 GP. The 1904 event set the benchmark at 24 minutes, 37.6 seconds, with a stunningly fast drive by Harry Harkness in his 40-horsepower Mercedes. That equated to an average speed of about 18 miles per hour, which is fairly close to your average speed today, albeit Harry's drive was on a fully gravel road, with conditions that were far less favorable than those of the current-day Autoroad. Fast forward to the 2017 Climb to the Clouds, where Travis Pastrana set an unbelievable time of 5 minutes, 44.72 seconds in his 600-plus horsepower factory Subaru rally car. Travis's average speed was just under 80 miles per hour, with top speeds approaching 140 miles per hour. As you drive along in your vehicle, try to imagine these two scenes in your mind. First, picture the early cars with their 15-horsepower engines straining to make the grade. And then the other extreme, the high-powered race cars of today that reach triple-digit speeds on the same turns you're negotiating right now. Throughout history, the most daring of racers have tried to capture the speed record on Mount Washington. Where horse-drawn wagons took 3 to 4 hours to make the ascent, early autos did it in just under 2 hours. The most recent racers have shaved the time to well under 6 minutes, though they don't get much of a chance to enjoy the fantastic views. If it has been clear and sunny for you here today, consider yourself lucky. The weather on Mount Washington is generally more interesting than that. It isn't just that the weather can change quickly here, it's that this mountain seems to generate its own climate and environment. Sure, the weather on the mountain generally aligns itself with the 4 seasons, but it overlaps them a lot more and mixes them together. Rain, snow, and sun make the rounds based more on random chance than what the calendar says. Some days there is rain in the valleys and beautiful sun on the mountain, or vice versa. Some days clouds fly by close enough to touch. Other times, an undercast develops, where a blanket of clouds shrouds the lowlands and the summits of the taller mountains protrude like islands in a sea of white. Hundreds of inches of snow fall here each year, and hurricane-force winds blow on more than a few occasions. And then there's the fog that's thick enough to chew. This and more make up what we call Mount Washington weather. It is both the diversity and extremes in the weather on this mountain that have made it a center of meteorological studies since the mid-1800s. The Hitchcock-Huntington expedition was the first to winter over on the summit in 1870. It was a remote, harsh winter wilderness, which exposed these scientists to conditions they couldn't have imagined. The U.S. Signal Corps took over from 1870 until 1892 and experienced many of the same conditions that the current members of the Mount Washington Observatory staff contend with. This journal entry from Sergeant Isaac Burke in the 1875 logbook details a difficult evening for the early observers.
January 27, 1875. Coldest of the season, 46 below. The wind is blowing a hurricane and has done so all through the night past. Hard work today to keep warm. The wind and cold penetrate every cranny. Enormous drifts have formed about the building, and as fast as the passage is cut out and the windows cleared, the wind drives in snow to fill up the gaps. The coal is far from being good and is full of rocks and clinkers. Respectfully suggest that good coal and another heating stove be purchased. If such weather as this is to continue, it would be wicked to keep men in such a dwelling.
It can be assumed that good coal and another stove weren't purchased because winter occupation ceased in 1890. It took 40 years to round up another crew of dedicated weather watchers, but in 1932, Alex Mackenzie, Joe Dodge, Bob Monahan, and Sal Pagliuca staked a new claim on the summit, and the Mount Washington Observatory began round-the-clock weather observations that still continue to this very day. Then came a day that no one expected, a day that has gone down in history and has made Mount Washington famous. It was April 12, 1934, and world record winds of 231 miles per hour blew over the summit of Mount Washington. Pagliuca's logbook entry for that day tells the story. "We've been taking turns knocking ice from the anemometer post. Shortly after 1 a.m., I set out to clear the ice again and disappeared into the fog on the roof. I felt the full blast of the 200-mile-per-hour southeast wind on my face. Kneeling on the platform, I pounded the foot-thick ice accumulation with all my strength, but alas, wasn't making much impression on the rough frost." On that day, Mount Washington earned another place in history and was forever nicknamed the home of the world's worst weather. Because of this, various companies and scientific institutions have tested everything from jet engines to paint to winter clothing. It's because of the reliably harsh extremes of Mount Washington weather that so many different types of tests have been done here in the past and will continue to be performed in the future. In a typical year, the temperature averages 27 degrees at the summit. The winds, although averaging 35 miles per hour, exceed hurricane force on more than 100 days out of the year. The summit is in the clouds more than 60% of the time. The snowfall averages 281 inches per year, although more than 500 inches, that's more than 47 feet, fell in the winter of 1968 and 1969. Below treeline, the Great Glen Trails Outdoor Center uses the road as part of its cross-country ski trail system and runs winter tours in our specially designed Mount Washington snow coaches. So, come back this winter for an exciting journey to just above treeline for a breathtaking look at the snow-covered Presidential Range. And we'll do all the driving. Winter is a time of unimaginable beauty and deep snow. In fact, on a part of the road known as the Cragway, 20 or more feet of snow accumulates each winter. Before the days of heavy equipment, pure manpower opened up drifted parts of the road. Each spring as the tourist season approached, the road crew, armed only with shovels, would begin to move the mountain of snow that had accumulated in certain areas. Imagine facing a wall of snow 20 feet deep and 500 feet long, knowing it was your job to break through. This is what the early road crews faced year after year. Today, the job hasn't changed, just the methods for accomplishing it. Snowcats and backhoes have taken over where men with shovels once fought the elements. But it's still a lot of work every spring to put this mountain road back in order after a harsh North Country winter. The Mount Washington Auto Road is as much a destination today as it ever was. There seems to be an almost mythical allure that draws people to the mountain's towering heights. For some, it's an opportunity to reach the top of a major mountain and then quietly contemplate the beauty and majesty of the surroundings. For others, it's a place to make history by setting a new record or breaking a previous one. This has been the case since Darby Field set out to climb Mount Washington in 1642. Each generation brings a steady stream of challengers, and the areas of endeavor are as diverse and unique as the individuals who undertake them. Here's a sample of just a few records and record breakers throughout time. 1857. A man counts his steps walking to the top, 16,925. 1861. The road opens and Colonel Joseph Thompson drives the first horse-drawn vehicle up Mount Washington. 1875. Harland Amon runs down the road in 54 minutes. 1887. An all-time record for horse-drawn vehicles is set by Charles O'Hara with a time up of 1 hour and 9 minutes. 1899. Freeland O'Stanley drives the first automobile up the road in 2 hours and 10 minutes. 1904. Harry Harkness sets a record in the first Climb to the Clouds auto race of 24 minutes 37.6 seconds. 1907. The first recorded round trip is made on skis. 1923. The automobile hill climb record drops to 17 minutes flat, set by Ralph Mulford in a Chandler. 1924. A Harley-Davidson motorcycle ascends in 15 minutes. 1926. Arthur Walden drives the first dog team to the summit. 1932. Florence Clark becomes the first woman to drive a dog team solo to the summit. 1934. A world record wind of 231 miles per hour is recorded on the summit. 1938. An automobile record of 12 minutes 17.6 seconds is set by Lem Ladd in a Ford V8 Special. 1950s. Alton Weagle of Walpole runs up the road, hikes up and down Tuckerman Ravine, and then rides the Cog Railway, a 30-mile trek, all in 14 hours. Weigel then goes on to climb the road barefoot and blindfolded, then backwards, then pushing a wheelbarrow carrying a 100-pound sack of sugar in it. 1975. An alternative energy regatta finds an odd assortment of vehicles powered by wood, steam, garbage, and chicken manure winding their way up Mount Washington. 1998. The Climb to the Clouds car race record drops to just 6 minutes 42 seconds, set by Frank Sprongel, driving an Audi Quattro. 2000. Thomas Danielson sets the still current bicycle hill climb record of 49 minutes 24 seconds. 2003. A Segway from Heritage, New Hampshire is ridden to the summit. 2004. Jonathan Wyatt set the still current foot race record of 56 minutes 41 seconds. 2010. Shawarge Amare becomes the fastest woman to run the road, setting a record time of 1 hour, 8 minutes, 21 seconds. 2017. Travis Pastrana shatters the Climb to the Clouds automobile record with an unimaginably quick time of just 5 minutes, 44.72 seconds. Less scientific-minded have been those who have used roller skates, llamas, skateboards, and unicycles as a method to reach the top. One New Hampshire man even claims to hold the record for the most diverse array of ascents. Hiking up as Darby Field in 1642 attire with Indian guides, riding up in the road's own 6-horse mountain wagon, in a 1917 Pierce Arrow, a 1938 Ford Woody, a modern-day auto road van, a motorcycle, a race car, snowmobile, snowcat, snow coach, Jeep, and a convertible. It seems that every year someone shows up asking permission to use the road to be the first or the fastest at something on Mount Washington. In addition to the Climb to the Clouds race, annual events include the Mount Washington Road Race, a classic all-uphill foot race that draws a field of over 1,300 runners, the best of whom can run the grueling 7.6-mile course in under 1 hour. Cyclists also get their chance to conquer the mountain in the Mount Washington Auto Road Bicycle Hill Climb, where the current record stands at just under 50 minutes. You'll find a complete list of our upcoming events at mountwashingtonautoroad.com. You've now joined with the explorers, adventurers, competitors, climbers, families, and travelers from throughout time and around the world who have found themselves drawn to the top of this mountain, to the place the Native Americans called Agiokochuk. The memories you take with you are yours forever. Aside from the exciting drive, one of the most amazing aspects of the Mount Washington Auto Road is that it allows anyone of any age the opportunity to summit this legendary mountain. You've had the chance to sit with your friends and family, get some perspective on the world we live in from a place unlike any other. You've breathed in the cool mountain air and reflected on those who came before you and those who will come after, perhaps members of your own family. Enjoy the rest of your day and your vacation in the White Mountains. Visit us again sometime for another drive in your own vehicle or take a guided tour in one of our stages. When you reach the bottom, come across the street and take advantage of everything we offer at the Base Lodge. The Glenview Cafe has a spectacular view of the mountain you've just climbed and serves homemade soups, sandwiches, and other goodies. The Douglas A. Philbrook Red Barn Museum features horse-drawn and automotive stages on display, as well as historical memorabilia from the Auto Road's long history. If you're in the mood for some outdoor adventure, visit Great Glen Trails Outdoor Center, located on the ground floor of the Base Lodge. We have nearly 30 miles of trails to explore on bike or on foot, where you'll experience these magnificent surroundings in a whole different way. Bring your own bike or rent one of ours and enjoy the family-friendly trail system here at Great Glen Trails, all accessed right from the Base Lodge. During the winter months, these same great trails are meticulously groomed for cross-country skiing and snowshoeing and rated among the best Nordic ski areas in New England. If you're looking to spend some time on the water, the Outdoor Center offers half-day guided wildlife kayak tours on the pristine, placid waters of the Androscoggin River, just a few miles north of the Auto Road. For even more adventure, take a full day to explore the natural wonders of the Lake Umbagog National Wildlife Refuge. Our experienced and fun guides will take care of all the details, including instruction for any ability. And no vacation to the White Mountains would be complete without a stay at the Glen House Hotel. Located just north of the Auto Road entrance, the Glen House provides beautiful, eco-friendly accommodations with some of the best views in New England. Take a swim in the indoor pool, sip a cocktail in the tavern, and enjoy a great meal at the Notch Grill. And when you're ready to explore the unspoiled beauty of the Great Glen, on foot, bike, skis, or snowshoes, our family-friendly trail system is just steps from the back door. Lots more information online at theglenhouse.com. Well, that's about it. If you're not at the base area, you will be soon.